That April morning in 1945 brought bitter cold across the German landscape. Gray clouds hung low over the countryside. In a narrow railway car between Nuremberg and Regensburg, Oberst Heinrich Müller gripped the small barred window. His knuckles turned white against the metal frame. The landscape rolling past looked nothing like the Germany he remembered. This wasn't the nation he had pledged to defend 5 long years ago. Müller wasn't just another captured soldier. His career in the Wehrmacht had spanned decades. He had led an entire artillery regiment on the brutal Eastern Front. Now he found himself crammed into a converted freight car. Dozens of other German prisoners surrounded him. Their uniforms were torn and dirty. Their faces showed exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. This railway car carried men who had once commanded respect and fear across occupied Europe. The train held nearly 2,000 German prisoners. All were bound for American POW camps somewhere in the distance. But their journey would twist in ways none of them could imagine. What awaited them would shake everything they believed about their enemies. It would challenge their understanding of war itself. Even their concepts of military honor would crumble. The Reich was dying around them. To grasp the shock waiting for these prisoners, you need to understand Germany's desperate situation in April 1945. The Third Reich was collapsing faster than anyone thought possible. Soviet tanks were grinding through Berlin's streets. Building by building, the Red Army advanced. American and British forces had crossed the Rhine weeks earlier. They raced across German territory now. Resistance was crumbling everywhere. German officers like Müller had spent years believing they fought a defensive war. They thought they were protecting Europe from Bolshevism. Now reality was breaking through the propaganda. The lies that had sustained them through years of brutal combat were falling apart. Their front lines dissolved as quickly as morning mist. The same railway system that once moved German troops across conquered Europe now carried them in the opposite direction. These hastily converted freight cars transported men who had defended the fatherland with desperate courage just weeks before. Their steel wheels clicked over tracks that once carried supplies to German armies. Now they carried defeat. The German prisoners couldn't comprehend what they were about to witness. The scale of American industrial might was beyond their imagination. While Germany had scraped together resources for years, rationing everything from bread to gasoline, America had been performing what could only be called a manufacturing miracle. American factories were producing aircraft at rates that seemed physically impossible. In 1944 alone, American plants manufactured over 96,000 aircraft. Think about that number for a moment. Germany's total aircraft production for the entire war reached approximately 119,000 planes. America was building in 1 year nearly what Germany had built in 6 years of total warfare. This production miracle extended far beyond flying machines. American shipyards launched Liberty ships faster than German submarines could sink them. The numbers were staggering. American factories produced tanks, trucks, weapons, and ammunition in quantities that made German production look pitiful. Even at Germany's peak output, they couldn't match American capacity. Most importantly for our story, American farms were feeding not just American forces. They fed Allied armies across the globe. They fed civilian populations in liberated countries. The abundance was incomprehensible to minds shaped by years of scarcity. The German prisoners on that cold April morning had heard whispered stories about American POW camps. Most of these rumors painted dark pictures. They expected harsh treatment and terrible conditions. German propaganda had spent years telling them Americans were soft and materialistic. They were supposedly weak people who would collapse under real military pressure. The reality waiting for them would destroy these beliefs completely. American POW camps in 1945 operated under Geneva Convention rules, but they also benefited from American abundance in ways that seemed like fantasy to men surviving on meager rations. German civilians were living on 1,000 calories per day or less. American POW camps provided prisoners with 2,500 to 3,000 calories daily. The quantity of food wasn't the only shock. The quality and variety would astound these hungry men. American camps served fresh meat at every meal. Vegetables appeared regularly. Bread was made with actual white flour. Real coffee, not the acorn substitutes Germans had learned to accept. Sometimes there were treats like chocolate and ice cream. Men who had been eating ersatz coffee made from acorns would soon taste real coffee beans. Bread stretched with sawdust would give way to actual wheat flour. This abundance seemed impossible to German minds, conditioned by years of want. As Oberst Miller's train wound through the German countryside that April morning, the prisoners inside were getting their first taste of American efficiency. These weren't the cattle cars that had transported so many victims of Nazi persecution. The converted railway cars were cramped, yes, but they had basic sanitation facilities. Ventilation was adequate. Someone had planned for human needs. The American guards were mostly young soldiers. They had been fighting across Europe for months. Their faces showed weariness, but they maintained professional discipline. They also showed casual humanity that surprised the German prisoners. These weren't the brutal revenge seekers German propaganda had warned about. They were young men who wanted to finish their job and return home to families and sweethearts. The train stopped regularly for water, food, and sanitation breaks. At each halt, German prisoners observed American logistics working like clockwork. Supply trucks arrived with mechanical precision. Their timing never varied. Communications equipment crackled with constant radio chatter. Everything moved with efficiency that spoke of vast resources and careful planning. What the German prisoners witnessed during transport went far beyond military efficiency. They were glimpsing a society that operated on principles completely foreign to their wartime experience. American soldiers casually threw away food that would have been precious in Germany. They wore uniforms made from high-quality materials. Their equipment spoke of manufacturing operating at full capacity. The contrast was stark and undeniable. German forces had been making do with increasingly inferior equipment for years. Their supplies had dwindled month by month. American forces seemed to have unlimited access to the finest everything. German prisoners watched American soldiers eating K-rations. These field rations contained more meat than many German civilians had seen in months. This abundance extended to details that seemed trivial but made profound impressions. American soldiers had access to cigarettes whenever they wanted them. They carried candy bars in their pockets. Some even had comic books to read during quiet moments. They wore wristwatches and carried cameras. Expensive equipment was treated with casual indifference. To German eyes, accustomed to a society where every resource was precious and carefully rationed, this casual abundance was almost incomprehensible. It suggested wealth beyond German imagination. Among the prisoners on Miller's train was Unteroffizier Klaus Weber. This young machine gunner had been captured during the American breakthrough at Remagen. Weber had grown up in a small Bavarian village. He had never traveled more than 50 kilometers from home before the war. His worldview had been shaped entirely by Nazi propaganda. Americans were supposed to be decadent and weak. Weber would later recall his amazement at observing American guards who seemed genuinely concerned about prisoner welfare. During one rest stop, an elderly German sergeant collapsed from exhaustion. American medics immediately provided treatment. Their equipment and medicines were superior to what German forces had available for their own wounded soldiers. This human dimension of American treatment created mental confusion for many German prisoners. They had been taught to expect brutality from their captors. Instead, they encountered systematic adherence to international law. This was backed by abundant resources and genuine organizational competence. As the train approached the outskirts of Regensburg, the unexpected happened. American P-51 Mustang fighters were flying a routine patrol mission. The pilots spotted the train from their altitude. In a tragic case of mistaken identity, they identified it as a German military transport. The pilots couldn't see the POW markings clearly from their speed and height. They made a split-second decision to attack. The strafing run lasted less than 2 minutes. Its impact on the German prisoners was profound and lasting. The same American military machine that had been providing them with food, medical care, and humane treatment had just demonstrated its lethal efficiency in the most direct way possible. Oberst Müller pressed himself against the railway car floor. 50 caliber bullets tore through the wooden sides above his head. Splinters rained down like deadly snow. He experienced a moment of terrible clarity. This was American power in its purest form, not the casual abundance he had been observing for days. This was the industrial capacity to project lethal force with precision and overwhelming superiority. The attack killed 17 German prisoners. Dozens more were wounded. Blood pooled on the railway car floors. Screams echoed in the confined space. But perhaps more significantly, the attack provided surviving prisoners with visceral understanding of why Germany had lost the war. The same society that could afford to feed prisoners better than German civilians could also afford to maintain air superiority so complete that American fighters operated over German territory with virtual impunity. In the immediate aftermath of the strafing, something remarkable happened. Something that would stay with German prisoners for the rest of their lives. American forces didn't respond with indifference. They didn't try to cover up the mistake. Instead, they provided immediate medical assistance and launched a thorough investigation. American medics arrived within hours. They brought medical supplies and equipment that surpassed what most German field hospitals possessed. The wounded prisoners received the same quality medical care that would have been provided to American casualties. Pain medication flowed freely. Surgical equipment was the finest available. Even blood plasma was used without hesitation to save German lives. This response created profound psychological impact on surviving prisoners. They had just experienced American military power in its most lethal form. This was followed immediately by American humanitarian values in their most generous expression. The same system that had nearly killed them was now working with equal efficiency to save their lives. As the damaged train limped toward its destination, now under heavy guard and with clear POW markings, the German prisoners began grappling with implications that went far beyond their immediate situation. They were witnessing a society that could simultaneously project overwhelming military force and maintain humanitarian principles. This combination seemed impossible to men raised under a totalitarian system. The casual efficiency with which American forces had responded to the strafing incident spoke to organizational capabilities that dwarfed anything in German experience. Radio communications summoned medical assistance across vast distances. Supply chains delivered specialized equipment to remote locations within hours. Administrative systems tracked individual prisoners and ensured their welfare even in the chaos of war's end. This wasn't just military efficiency. It was the expression of a society that had resources and organizational capacity to maintain its values even under the stress of total war. For German prisoners who had watched their own society gradually abandon its humanitarian pretenses under wartime pressure, this demonstration of American capabilities was both impressive and deeply unsettling. For career officers like Oberst Müller, the strafing incident raised profound questions about military honor and the conduct of war. In German military tradition, honor was closely tied to personal courage and adherence to duty, even in hopeless situations. The concept of fighting to the last man was deeply embedded in Wehrmacht culture. But what did honor mean when facing an enemy with such overwhelming material superiority? The American pilots who had strafed the train were not cowards or criminals. They were competent professionals operating within a military system that could afford to maintain air superiority over enemy territory. Their mistake had been tactical, not moral. This realization forced German prisoners to confront uncomfortable truths about their own military situation. They had been fighting not just against American and Allied armies, they had been fighting against entire societies that could sustain military operations while maintaining humanitarian standards. The strafing incident was tragic, but the response to it demonstrated capabilities that explained why Germany was losing the war. As the train resumed its journey toward American POW camps, now with additional medical cars and enhanced security, the German prisoners found themselves in a strange psychological state. They had experienced American military power in its most lethal form, but they had also witnessed American humanitarian values in action. The contrast with their own experience was stark and undeniable. German military efficiency had been built on rigid hierarchy and harsh discipline. Resources were always scarce. Humanitarian considerations were often sacrificed to military necessity. The American system seemed to operate on completely different principles. Abundant resources allowed for both military effectiveness and humanitarian treatment. This abundance wasn't just material, it was also moral and organizational. American forces could afford to investigate mistakes. They could provide medical care to enemies. They could maintain legal standards even in the chaos of war's end. For German prisoners accustomed to a system where such luxuries were impossible, this demonstration of American capabilities was profoundly educational. The journey continued, carrying its cargo of German prisoners toward an encounter with American society that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their enemies, their war, and themselves. The strafing incident had been a tragic introduction to American military power, but it was only the beginning of a much larger education in the realities of American society and values. As the train rolled through the German countryside toward its destination, Oberst Müller and his fellow prisoners were about to discover that the real shock wasn't American military capability. It was American abundance, efficiency, and the casual way in which American society maintained its humanitarian values while prosecuting total war. The colonel, who had never expected Americans to strafe a prisoner train, was about to learn that this incident, tragic as it was, represented only a tiny fraction of American capabilities. The real revelation would come when these prisoners encountered the full scope of American society. They would begin to understand why their own nation had been doomed from the moment it declared war on such a power. The train carrying Oberst Müller and surviving German prisoners finally shuddered to a halt at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. 3 weeks had passed since the strafing incident. As heavy doors of their railway cars slid open with metallic groans, prisoners were greeted not by harsh commands they expected. Instead, humid warmth of a southern spring morning washed over them. The sight of American soldiers seemed almost casual in their efficiency. What happened next would fundamentally alter every German prisoner's understanding of the war they had just lost. As Müller stepped down from the train car, His legs were unsteady after the long journey. He found himself face to face with an American sergeant consulting a clipboard. The sergeant gave the same methodical attention a German quartermaster might give to precious ammunition supplies. But this clipboard contained nothing more critical than prisoner processing information. Yet it was printed on high-quality paper with multiple carbon copies. "Welcome to Mississippi, Colonel," the sergeant said, in accented but competent German. The casual use of Miller's rank impressed him despite himself. The acknowledgement of his status, despite being a prisoner, spoke to preparation and resources. The simple fact that this American non-commissioned officer spoke German well enough to communicate effectively demonstrated a level of planning that was remarkable. The processing station was a revelation in American organizational efficiency. Each prisoner was photographed with equipment that produced clear, professional images within minutes. Medical examinations were conducted with instruments that many German field hospitals would have envied. Personal belongings were catalogued with typewritten forms that used more paper for a single prisoner than many German units had available for critical communications. But it was the casual waste that truly shocked the German prisoners. American soldiers discarded partially eaten meals that contained more protein than most German civilians had seen in weeks. Cigarettes were left burning in ashtrays, forgotten in the rush of daily duties. Equipment that would have been carefully maintained and hoarded in the German army was treated with indifference that spoke to unlimited replacement capability. Camp Shelby sprawled across thousands of acres of Mississippi pine forest. What struck the German prisoners wasn't its size. It was its apparent permanence and quality of construction. The barracks were well-built wooden structures with proper foundations. Electrical wiring ran throughout. Plumbing worked reliably. Each building housed prisoners in conditions that exceeded what many German soldiers had experienced in their own barracks. The camp's infrastructure was a testament to American industrial capability. Roads were paved and well-maintained. Electrical power was reliable and abundant. Lights burned throughout the night without apparent concern for conservation. Water was available on demand from multiple sources, hot and cold. The quality surpassed what many German cities could provide their civilian populations. The medical facilities at Camp Shelby were particularly impressive to German eyes. The camp hospital was equipped with X-ray machines that worked perfectly. Modern surgical equipment filled operating rooms. Pharmaceutical supplies exceeded what was available to German military hospitals. American medical personnel treated German prisoners with the same professional competence they would show their own wounded. They used supplies without apparent regard for cost or scarcity. Nothing prepared the German prisoners for their first meal in American captivity. The dining hall at Camp Shelby served food in quantities and varieties that seemed impossible to men accustomed to wartime rationing. Fresh meat appeared at every meal, not the ersatz substitutes that had become common in Germany. This was actual beef, pork, and chicken, prepared with seasonings and cooking techniques that had been forgotten luxuries in the Reich. Unteroffizier Weber, the young Bavarian machine gunner, later described his first American meal as a psychological shock more profound than combat. White bread made from actual wheat flour sat on his tray. Butter was real butter rather than margarine substitute. Coffee was actual coffee rather than the chicory and acorn mixtures German civilians had learned to accept. Each item on his tray represented abundance that contradicted everything he'd been taught about American society. The portions were equally shocking. American mess sergeants served food in quantities that would have fed 2 or 3 German soldiers. Prisoners were encouraged to return for seconds. Food that wasn't consumed was simply discarded. This practice horrified German prisoners, who had been conditioned to view every calorie as precious. Perhaps most shocking of all was the casual attitude of American personnel toward this abundance. Mess hall workers treated the preparation and service of these elaborate meals as routine duty. They showed no awareness that they were providing better nutrition to enemy prisoners than most German civilians were receiving. The daily routine at Camp Shelby demonstrated American organizational capabilities that went far beyond simple abundance. The camp operated with clockwork precision, but it lacked the harsh discipline that characterized German military organization. American guards maintained security through systematic procedures rather than intimidation. They used administrative controls that were both effective and humane. Mail service provided a particularly striking example of American efficiency. Letters from German prisoners to their families were processed, censored, and dispatched with speed and reliability that exceeded German postal service even in peacetime. The censorship itself was conducted by American personnel who spoke fluent German. They applied consistent standards that prisoners could understand and predict. The camp library was another revelation. American authorities had assembled collections of German books, newspapers, and magazines. These provided prisoners with access to information and entertainment that exceeded what was available to German civilians. The casual way these resources were provided, without apparent concern for cost or security implications, spoke to a society that could afford intellectual luxury even for its enemies. For career officers like Oberst Müller, the experience of American captivity created profound psychological challenges. The abundance and efficiency they witnessed daily contradicted fundamental assumptions about American society. These assumptions had sustained German military morale throughout the war. German propaganda had consistently portrayed Americans as soft, materialistic people who lacked spiritual strength necessary for sustained warfare. The reality of American military organization suggested something quite different. Here was a society with such abundant resources that it could afford to maintain humanitarian standards while prosecuting total war across multiple continents. The casual competence of American personnel was particularly unsettling to German military minds. American guards and administrators performed their duties with professional efficiency, but they lacked the rigid formality that characterized German military culture. This suggested confidence born of genuine strength rather than fear-based discipline. The depth of organizational discipline they had witnessed spoke to something profound about American civilization. External enforcement seemed unnecessary when an entire society had absorbed such thorough structural thinking. German prisoners at Camp Shelby spent weeks watching this phenomenon unfold. Months passed slowly in captivity. Each day brought fresh revelations about American society that shattered everything these men thought they understood about the war. The abundance surrounding them wasn't merely military surplus or wartime logistics. This was how an entire civilization operated. Every aspect of American organization reflected principles that remained completely foreign to German understanding. These weren't temporary wartime measures. This was normal life for Americans. American industrial output defied every assumption German minds could form about what was possible. Military equipment rolled off assembly lines in quantities that seemed mathematically impossible. Food production continued at levels that exceeded anything Germany had achieved during peacetime. Consumer goods appeared simultaneously. Civilian living standards actually improved, while America fought a global war on multiple fronts. This abundance touched every corner of American society. Human resources received the same casual treatment as material resources. The soldiers guarding Camp Shelby possessed educational backgrounds that challenged fundamental German beliefs about democratic societies. College graduates served as enlisted men. Skilled technicians had volunteered for military service. Professional men had left civilian careers to fight. These weren't conscripted peasants or factory workers pressed into service. These were educated citizens who had chosen military duty. The voluntary nature of their service contradicted everything Germans believed about democratic weakness and social decay. Daily existence at Camp Shelby provided constant reminders of this stark contrast. German civilians back home survived on rations that grew smaller each month. Ersatz coffee replaced real coffee. Sawdust extended flour supplies. Turnips substituted for potatoes. Every calorie required careful planning. Meanwhile, German prisoners in American custody ate better than they had as soldiers in the Wehrmacht. Fresh meat appeared regularly. Real coffee flowed freely. White bread accompanied every meal. Vegetables arrived fresh from American farms. The nutrition they received exceeded what German officers enjoyed in peacetime. Medical attention available to prisoners surpassed what German military hospitals provided to their own wounded soldiers. American medical staff treated enemy prisoners with equipment and supplies that would have been considered luxury items in wartime Germany. Dental work proceeded as routine maintenance rather than emergency treatment. Eye examinations included corrective lenses fitted precisely to individual needs. Psychiatric care addressed mental health with professional competence and adequate time. These services operated as standard prisoner benefits rather than special privileges. American personnel discarded materials that German forces would have treasured as vital supplies. This wasn't carelessness or ignorance about wartime shortages. American society could afford apparent waste while maintaining peak efficiency across all operations. Resources flowed so abundantly that conservation seemed unnecessary. This casual attitude toward abundance spoke to capabilities that German experience couldn't comprehend. Victory had become inevitable before the war began. German prisoners wrestling with their defeat found uncomfortable answers in their American captivity experience. Military courage hadn't failed them. Tactical skill hadn't abandoned German forces. Strategic planning hadn't been fundamentally flawed. Germany had challenged a society with such overwhelming advantages that defeat was mathematically certain from the opening shots. The strafing incident that brought them to American attention demonstrated this reality in miniature. American air superiority was so complete that pilots operated over German territory without fear. No German fighters rose to intercept them. No anti-aircraft fire threatened their missions. American forces controlled German skies so thoroughly that individual aircraft could attack targets of opportunity without coordinated support. This same society that maintained such overwhelming military capability could simultaneously afford to investigate mistakes made by individual pilots. Humanitarian treatment of enemy prisoners proceeded alongside devastating military operations against German forces. American society possessed such vast resources that both activities continued without conflict or competition for limited supplies. Germany hadn't just lost a military conflict. They had challenged a civilization with organizational capabilities that dwarfed German achievements. The futility of their original decision became clear through daily observation of American abundance and efficiency. Camp routines established patterns that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Work details operated with smooth efficiency, but without harsh German-style discipline. Prisoners received assignments that utilized their professional skills and military experience. Conditions emphasized productive output rather than punitive treatment. Tasks were organized logically, with adequate tools and materials provided for completion. Supervisors offered guidance without threats or intimidation. Work proceeded at sustainable paces that maintained quality while preventing exhaustion. American efficiency didn't require brutality or fear. Educational opportunities at Camp Shelby revealed another dimension of American approaches to human development. German prisoners could study English language with qualified instructors. American history classes operated with professional competence and adequate materials. Government courses explained democratic principles through systematic instruction. Technical training programs prepared prisoners for post-war reconstruction work. These weren't propaganda sessions designed to break German morale. Professional educators conducted genuine learning experiences that treated enemy prisoners as human beings worthy of intellectual investment. Recreation facilities included equipment that German civilians hadn't seen since before the war. Sports gear arrived regularly from American suppliers. Musical instruments were maintained in good working condition. Craft supplies supported hobby activities that would have been considered wasteful luxuries in wartime Germany. American society could afford to provide entertainment and personal development opportunities for enemy prisoners while simultaneously prosecuting global warfare against multiple opponents. This casual provision of amenities spoke to resource abundance that German experience couldn't match. Understanding began to crystallize as German prisoners grasped the broader implications of what they were witnessing. American war victory wasn't achieved through superior resources alone. These people had developed completely different approaches to organizing human society. Democratic principles actually worked better than authoritarian alternatives. American abundance resulted from systematic approaches to education that developed human potential rather than suppressing individual initiative. Technological advancement proceeded through open competition rather than state control. Economic organization rewarded innovation and efficiency rather than political loyalty. This casual efficiency in military operations reflected deeper social capabilities. The United States had mobilized resources on scales that made German achievements seem modest by comparison. Democratic society had proven more effective at total war than authoritarian systems designed specifically for military conflict. Psychological challenges emerged as German prisoners recognized the implications of these observations. Their entire identity structure had been built around service to a state claiming to represent the pinnacle of human achievement. Racial superiority theories collapsed when confronted with American demographic diversity and educational achievement. Authoritarian efficiency proved inferior to democratic organization in every measurable category. Military virtue traditions couldn't compete with American industrial and technological capabilities. Everything they had believed about politics and social organization required fundamental reconsideration. The war's end in Europe brought news that German prisoners had awaited with mixed feelings of anticipation and dread. Return to Germany would finally become possible. 2 years of American captivity had changed these men profoundly. Their understanding of the world had been rebuilt from basic assumptions upward. The homeland awaiting their return had undergone transformations that would make readjustment even more challenging than they imagined. German society had been systematically destroyed, while American society had grown stronger and more prosperous. The contrast they would encounter upon return would provide final devastating lessons about the true cost of the war they had fought and lost. Transportation arrangements for prisoner repatriation demonstrated American capabilities one final time. The trains carrying German prisoners back to Europe bore no resemblance to the damaged freight cars that had brought them to American attention 2 years before. Properly equipped passenger cars provided comfortable seating for the long journey. Food service operated throughout the trip, with adequate supplies and professional preparation. Medical facilities were staffed by American personnel trained to handle any health issues that might arise during transport. Even in prisoner repatriation, American efficiency and humanitarian concerns operated simultaneously. Atlantic crossings proceeded aboard American transport vessels that had sustained Allied operations across the globe throughout the war. These ships continued to operate with efficiency and abundance that amazed German observers even after 2 years of witnessing American capabilities. Peacetime service maintained the same standards as wartime operations. The massive fleet that had projected American power to every continent now carried former enemies home with the same professional competence. Ship operations demonstrated organizational capabilities that had made American victory inevitable. Even routine transport operations exceeded German military standards for efficiency and resource management. Weber found himself serving as translator during the journey home. His English had improved dramatically during captivity. Relationships developed with American personnel would have seemed impossible during his combat service. These personal connections provided insights into American society that went beyond prisoner observations. American soldiers supervising repatriation were themselves eager to return home. They spoke casually about educational opportunities waiting through the GI Bill. Jobs awaited them in industries that had expanded dramatically during wartime production. Living standards had actually improved during the conflict, rather than declining. American society had been transformed by wartime prosperity, while German society had been destroyed by wartime devastation. The soldiers returning to America faced bright futures in an expanding economy. German prisoners faced uncertain prospects in a devastated homeland. German border crossings in summer 1947 provided immediate and devastating evidence of the contrast between American abundance and German destruction. The landscape they encountered bore scars that would require decades to heal. Civilization had been systematically dismantled by the same American military machine that had treated them with casual humanitarian efficiency. Cities they passed through showed evidence of bombing campaigns conducted with the same overwhelming superiority they had witnessed in the strafing of their prisoner train. But now, the full scope of American air power's impact on German society became visible. Hamburg lay in ruins with entire districts reduced to rubble. Cologne's ancient cathedral stood amid devastation that stretched to every horizon. Dresden presented moonscape vistas where thriving neighborhoods had once housed hundreds of thousands of civilians. Berlin showed systematic destruction that had targeted every aspect of urban life and infrastructure. Mueller pressed against the train window as they passed through what remained of Nuremberg. The medieval city center had been obliterated with surgical precision. Industrial facilities had been systematically eliminated. The symbolic heart of Nazi power had been reduced to debris and memories. Railway infrastructure told the story of Germany's methodical defeat. Bridges had been destroyed and replaced with temporary structures that barely supported light traffic. Railway yards showed evidence of systematic bombing that had crippled German logistics throughout the final years of war. The efficient transportation network that had once moved German armies across Europe had been methodically dismantled by American air power. Every major junction had been targeted repeatedly until German military movement became impossible. American precision bombing had achieved strategic objectives that German forces couldn't counter or repair. Reception centers processing returning German prisoners operated with resources so limited that basic administrative functions required careful conservation. Paper was precious. Ink required rationing. Supplies that Americans had used without thought were treasured necessities in defeated Germany. German officials working under Allied supervision made do with equipment that spoke to a society struggling with fundamental shortages. Handwritten forms replaced typewriters. Basic equipment substituted for professional photography. The contrast with American prisoner processing was immediate and devastating. Medical examinations revealed the extent of damage to German society during the war years. Many returning prisoners were in better physical condition than the German medical personnel examining them. American captivity had actually improved their health compared to what wartime Germany could have provided. Nutrition received in American camps exceeded what German civilians had experienced during the final war years. Medical care had been more comprehensive than German military hospitals could offer their own wounded soldiers. Enemy prisoners had been treated better than German citizens during the collapse of their society. Human dimensions of German defeat became visible as former prisoners made their way to home communities. Families had been shattered by military casualties and systematic destruction of German social structures. Women and children bore physical and psychological scars from years of bombing and privation. Social collapse had left entire communities struggling to maintain basic functions. Demographic impact was immediately visible in every village and town. Women, children, and elderly men populated German communities almost exclusively. The generation that had fought the war was dead, missing, or still in Allied captivity. Weber's return to his Bavarian village provided a microcosm of Germany's broader devastation. His family had survived, but their circumstances had been reduced to levels unimaginable before 1939. Food remained scarce despite the war's end. Housing was overcrowded with refugees from bombed cities. Basic services operated sporadically due to fuel shortages and equipment destruction. The confident society that had launched wars of conquest had been replaced by a population struggling for basic survival while grappling with moral implications of the regime they had supported. Psychological impact on German civilians matched the physical destruction surrounding them. The ideological foundations of their society had been thoroughly discredited. Everything they had believed about German superiority and historical destiny had been proven false through devastating military defeat. German economic reality greeting returning prisoners was a shadow of the industrial powerhouse that had sustained 6 years of global warfare. Allied bombing had systematically destroyed military production facilities along with the entire industrial infrastructure that had made Germany a major power. Currency had become meaningless across much of occupied Germany. Barter systems replaced monetary exchange in most communities. Cigarettes and food served as more reliable stores of value than German marks. The sophisticated financial system that had funded military expansion had collapsed with the state that created it. Employment opportunities for returning prisoners were limited by economic destruction and systematic dismantling of German military industries. Men who had served as skilled technicians in the Wehrmacht found their expertise unwanted in a society prohibited from maintaining significant military capabilities. Heavy industry had been dismantled by Allied authorities determined to prevent future German aggression. The knowledge and experience that had made these men valuable soldiers became irrelevant in occupied Germany's restricted economy. Professional skills developed during military service couldn't transfer to civilian occupations available under Allied occupation. Social transformation extended far beyond physical reconstruction requirements. Ideological foundations that had sustained Nazi society had been thoroughly discredited through military defeat and moral exposure. German populations struggled to understand their recent history while contemplating uncertain future possibilities. Denazification programs conducted by Allied authorities forced German civilians to confront reality about the regime they had supported. For returning prisoners who had witnessed American humanitarian values in action, this confrontation was particularly complex and psychologically challenging. They had observed their enemies maintain moral standards while demonstrating overwhelming military superiority. This combination challenged fundamental assumptions about power relationships and moral authority that had shaped their understanding of political systems and international relations. Educational systems were being rebuilt under Allied supervision with curricula designed to promote democratic values and critical thinking skills. For a generation educated under Nazi ideology, this represented fundamental challenges to their understanding of history, politics, and human nature itself. Previous education had emphasized obedience, racial superiority, and authoritarian leadership as natural social principles. Democratic education promoted individual initiative, equality, and collaborative decision-making as superior alternatives. The psychological adjustment required was profound and often painful. Professional military culture that had defined their identities had been thoroughly discredited through devastating defeat. The society they had served lay in ruins around them. Everything they had believed about military effectiveness and social organization required complete reconsideration. American captivity had provided insights into alternative approaches to organizing human civilization. They had witnessed democracy operating more efficiently than German authoritarianism. Capitalist economics had proven more productive than German state control systems. Military organization had been more effective than Prussian traditions. These insights created profound psychological challenges for men who had built their identities around service to a state claiming to represent human achievement's pinnacle. Reality of German defeat and American superiority forced them to question political beliefs, along with fundamental assumptions about human nature and social organization. Practical challenges of rebuilding lives in post-war Germany were immense beyond anything they had imagined while in American captivity. Housing was scarce due to bombing damage and massive refugee populations from eastern territories. Employment opportunities remained limited by economic destruction and Allied restrictions on German industry. Basic services like healthcare and education operated with severely reduced resources and damaged infrastructure. Transportation systems functioned sporadically when fuel and equipment could be obtained. Communication networks had been disrupted by systematic bombing campaigns that targeted civilian infrastructure. Many returning prisoners discovered that families had been scattered by wartime evacuation and destruction. Wives and children had been moved from bombed cities, often losing contact with relatives for months or years. Bureaucratic systems were overwhelmed and under-resourced, making family reunification difficult and time-consuming. Skills that had made these men effective soldiers were often irrelevant to challenges of post-war reconstruction. Military training provided little preparation for civilian occupations available in occupied Germany. Combat experience was useless for rebuilding damaged communities and establishing new economic foundations. Many former officers found themselves working as laborers in positions representing dramatic reductions in social status and professional identity. The hierarchy and respect they had known in military service disappeared in civilian society, struggling with basic survival needs. Despite hardships surrounding them, many returning prisoners brought valuable insights gained from observing American society during captivity. They had witnessed organizational methods, technological capabilities, and social approaches that could potentially contribute to German reconstruction efforts. Weber's experience with American agricultural techniques observed during work details at Camp Shelby proved valuable when he returned to farming in Bavaria. Efficiency methods he had learned helped maximize productivity from limited resources available to German farmers in the post-war period. His understanding of American approaches to crop rotation, soil conservation, and equipment maintenance contributed to his family's survival during difficult Reconstruction years. Knowledge gained as a prisoner of war became valuable civilian skills in defeated Germany. Muller's observations of American military organization influenced his later work in civilian administration under Allied occupation authorities. Democratic leadership styles he had witnessed challenged his assumptions about authority relationships and hierarchical decision-making processes. Collaborative approaches he had observed in American operations proved more effective than authoritarian methods for managing reconstruction projects and community organization efforts. Insights gained in captivity shaped his contribution to building new German institutional structures. The return of German prisoners was part of broader European transformation that would reshape the continent for generations to come. The war had demonstrated superiority of democratic institutions and market economies over authoritarian alternatives, setting the stage for reconstruction along American lines. The Marshall Plan, announced in 1947, would provide American resources for European reconstruction on scales that dwarfed previous international assistance programs. For German prisoners who had witnessed American abundance firsthand, this generosity toward former enemies was consistent with humanitarian values they had experienced in captivity. Emerging Cold War tensions would provide new context for German-American relations, transforming former enemies into allies against Soviet expansion. For men who had fought against American forces, this transformation required yet another adjustment in their understanding of international relations and political loyalties. The experience of German prisoners in American captivity provided profound lessons about modern warfare and industrial society's nature. They had encountered civilization that combined overwhelming material capability with genuine humanitarian values, demonstrating possibilities for human organization that contradicted their previous assumptions about power and morality. The strafing incident that had brought them into contact with American military power had been tragic in its immediate human cost, but it had also been instructive about the casual efficiency with which American forces could project lethal power across any battlefield. The response to that incident showed humanitarian values guiding American policy even toward enemies who had caused American casualties. Investigation procedures and prisoner treatment demonstrated institutional commitment to moral principles that operated even under combat conditions. Abundance they had witnessed wasn't just impressive in its scale and scope. It was impressive in its implications for human possibility and social organization. American society had demonstrated that democratic institutions and market economies could generate prosperity and military capability that exceeded authoritarian achievements. The lessons they had learned would contribute to transformation of their nation as German society began the long process of reconstruction. Democratic institutions and market economy that would emerge in West Germany would reflect insights gained from observing American society during wartime captivity. The Federal Republic of Germany, emerging from Third Reich ruins, would become one of America's closest allies. This transformation seemed impossible during bitter fighting of 1944 and 1945, but it reflected deeper understanding of American values and capabilities gained through direct observation. Men who had experienced American captivity would play important roles in building new Germany. They brought hard-won insights into values and methods that had made American victory possible. Their understanding of democratic principles and humanitarian values would influence German reconstruction along democratic lines. The colonel, who had never expected Americans to strafe a prisoner train, had learned that incident was merely one small demonstration of American capabilities. The real lesson had come from witnessing society that could afford to maintain humanitarian standards while demonstrating overwhelming superiority. This combination would reshape not just Germany, but the entire post-war world order. For Oberstmüller, Weber, and thousands of other German prisoners, the journey from combat through captivity to repatriation had provided devastating education in realities of modern warfare and industrial society. They had encountered an enemy that was not only militarily superior, but morally and organizationally superior as well. This discovery would influence their understanding of the world for the rest of their lives, shaping their contribution to building a new Germany worthy of partnership with the nation that had defeated them so thoroughly, yet treated them so humanely.